Desperate for answers, I turned to the only person who might know the truth, my mother. Late one night, as she laid in bed, I sat beside her and asked, "Why didn't you cry when Grandma died?" Her eyes flickered open, her gaze distant. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. "I was angry. She was also so controlling, so critical. Even when I was an adult, she treated me like a child." "So you hated her?" "No," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I loved her, but I didn't know how to show it. And when she died, I felt free. I know it's terrible, but that's how I felt." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. That night, I dreamt again. This time, the field was different. It was no longer empty. It was filled with gravestones. At the center stood my grandmother, her face pale and shadowed. "I don't want to hurt you, Ada," she said, her voice softer now. "Then stop," I pleaded. "Let us go." "Not until I've remembered, not until your mother understands what she did." The whispers became screams that night, filling the house with a deafening roar. Shadows danced on the walls, and the air grew so cold I could see my breath. The dog stood in the center of the living room, its body glowing with an unnatural light. And this ends tonight," the voice said. "No," I said firmly, "it ends now." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the photograph I found in the storeroom. It was the only thing I had left of my grandmother, the only thing that could remind her of who she truly was. "You don't need revenge to be remembered," I said, holding the photograph out. "We'll remember you. We'll remember you." For a moment, the dog hesitated. His glowing eyes flickered, and the shadows around it seemed to waver. Then, slowly, he stepped forward and snugged the photograph. The air grew still, the cold receded. "I'm sorry," the voice whispered, softer than this, and then it was gone. The dog collapsed, his body limp and lifeless. The whispers stopped, and the shadows melted away. My grandmother was finally at peace. The house was silent again, too silent. I sat in the living room floor, the photograph still in my hands. The dog's lighted body lay a few feet away, its once glowing eyes now dull and empty. A part of me wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, a heavy emptiness settled in my chest. Mom came downstairs looking pale but stronger than she had in weeks. She paused when she saw the dog, her face twisted with a mix of confusion and relief. "What happened?" she asked, her voice shaky. "She's gone," I said softly. "Grandma is gone." Mom stared at me for a long moment before sinking into the floor beside me. She looked at the photograph in my hands and let out a shaky breath. "I never told you much about her, did I?" she said. I shook my head. She was a complicated woman. She loved fiercely, but she could be difficult. I guess I never really forgave her for the way she treated me. She just wanted to be remembered," I said, her voice breaking. My mom reached out and touched the photograph, her fingers trembling. "I do remember her every day. I just didn't know how to deal with the pain." In the weeks that followed, things returned to normal, or as normal as they could be. Mom's health improved and the heavy atmosphere that had clung to the house finally lifted. But the memories lingered. Every now and then, I'll catch glimpses of shadows moving in the corners of my vision, or hear faint whispers in the dead of the night. They weren't threatening anymore, just there. One evening, as I sat in the backyard, I felt a breeze brush against my face. It was warm and comforting, like a gentle hug. "I'll remember you," I whispered to the wind, and for the first time in weeks, I felt at peace. Months later, on a bright and sunny afternoon, I was playing in the yard when I heard it again. Scratch, scratch. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Slowly, I turned towards the gate. A dog was standing there, not the same one, but similar. Black fur, glowing eyes, and an all too familiar tilt of his head. My heart raced as he stepped closer. Its gaze locked on mine. Grandma, I whispered. The dog didn't respond. He simply sat down, his tail wagging slowly, and smiled. And I knew she wasn't done yet. The dog sat there staring at me with those eyes that seemed to know too much. My hands trembled as I backed away, my paws hammering in my ears. Go away, I whispered, my voice shaking. Leave us alone. He tilted his head, just like the first dog had, and then backed. A single sharp sound that echoed across the yard. Mom came rushing out of the house. What's going on, Ada? I pointed at the dog, but the words wouldn't come out. Mom squinted at the gate, her expression softening. He's just a stray, she said. Poor thing looks hungry. No, I shouted, startling her. He's not just a dog. Mom frowned, but she didn't press on further. She walked towards the gate, opened it, and let the dog in. My chest tightened as he padded into the yard. It eyed locking onto mine for just a moment before turning his attention to Mom. Strange things began happening around the house again. Objects would move on their own, doors would creak open and shut, and I started hearing faint whispers in the middle of the night. But this time, the whispers weren't anger, they sounded worried. One afternoon, as I was walking home from school, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, expecting to see someone, but the street was empty. Then, out of nowhere, Lucky appeared, glowing at something I couldn't see. Stay close, the voice in my head said. I ran the rest of the way home, the dog at my heels. That night, I woke up to the sound of low growls. Lucky was at the window, his body tense, his teeth bared. I followed his gaze and froze. Outside in the moonlit yard stood a figure cloaked in shadow. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there staring up at my window. Who is that? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Lucky growled again, louder this time, and the figure disappeared, melting into the shadows. The next morning, I told Mom and Dad about the figure, but they dismissed it as a bad dream. You've been through a lot, Ada, Mom said gently. It's probably just your imagination, but I knew what I saw. And so did Lucky. The whispers became more frequent, more urgent. Lucky stayed by my side at all times, his watchful eyes scanning every corner of the house. One night, I dreamt of the dark field again. My grandmother was there, but she wasn't alone. The shadow man stood beside her, his presence looming and oppressive. He's coming, she said, her voice trembling. Who? I asked. The one who cursed her bloodline, she said. The one who took everything from me, from us. I woke up with a start, my heart racing. Lucky was sitting at the foot of my bed, its eye glowing brighter than ever. What does she mean? I asked the dog. The voice in my head was soft but firm. You have to be ready. I couldn't let it go. I needed answers. I returned to the storeroom, my heart pounding as I rummaged through the boxes again. At the very bottom of one hidden beneath old blanket, I found a faded journal. It belonged to my great grandmother. As I read through the pages, a horrifying story began to unfold. Generations ago, our family had been cursed by a man my great grandmother had wronged. He had sworn that no child in our bloodline would ever live in peace, and his spirit has haunted our family ever since. My grandmother's anger, my mother's miscarriages, even my own nightmare, it all traced back to him, and now he was coming for me. That night, the house shook with an unnatural force. Shadows crawled along the walls, and the whispers turned into screams. The shadow man was there. Lucky stood in the center of the living room, his body glowing with a golden light. The shadow man loomed before us, his form towering and menacing. You'll run for long enough. The voice in my head said, it's time to end this. The battle was a blood fight and darkness of growls of scream. Lucky charged at the shadow man's growing form, cutting through the darkness like a blade. I didn't know what to do, but something told me to hold on to the photograph of my grandmother. I clutched it tightly, whispering a prayer I didn't even know I remembered. The light grew brighter, filling the room until it was blinding, and then everything was silent. When I opened my eyes, the house was still, the shadow man was gone, and Lucky lay motionless on the floor. Tears streamed down my face as I knelt beside the door. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice breaking. A soft breeze swept through the room, carrying with it the faint scent of my grandmother's favorite flowers. "We are free now," the voice in my head said, fading into the distance. Weeks passed, and the house settled into an unfamiliar calm. The air no longer felt heavy, the shadows no longer lingered, and the ominous whispers were gone. For the first time in what felt like forever, peace had returned. Mom's health improved rapidly, her energy returning along with her smile. She began to talk more openly about grandmother, sharing stories from her childhood, some happy, some sad, but all heartfelt. "I think she would have been proud of you," Mom said one evening as we sat together. She always wanted someone to take care of the family the way she did. "She did care," I whispered, staring at the photograph of Grandma that now hung in our living room. "She just didn't know how to show it sometimes." Mom nodded, tears in her eyes. One night, as I drifted off to sleep, I felt that familiar warmth at the foot of my bed. When I opened my eyes, Lucky was there, at least something that looked like him. But his form shimmered, glowing faintly in the darkness. "Is it really over?" I said softly. The voice no longer eerie but comforting replied in my head, "Yes, the curse is broken. Our family is safe now." I sat up, tears streaming down my eyes. "Will I ever see you again?" The dog tilted his head the same way it always did, and then faded into the air, leaving behind a soft breeze that smelled of wildflowers. Time healed the wounds left behind by the ordeal. I grew up carrying the lessons my grandmother had taught me, even in her unconventional ways. I learned to cherish the people I love and to forgive, even when it wasn't. The photograph of Grandma remained in the living room, a silent reminder of her love and her pain. And though Lucky was gone, I sometimes felt a gentle breeze watching over me, especially in moments of doubt or fear. It was as though Grandma's spirit, freed from its torment, had found a way to protect us without causing harm. Years later, as I tucked my own child into bed, she looked up at me with wild eyes and asked, "Mom, do you think grandmother is still watching us?" I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I think she's always with us, in her own way. And I think she wants us to be happy." As I turned off the light and closed the door, I felt that familiar warmth again, a gentle reminder that some bonds, no matter how strained, can never be broken. And I knew without a doubt that she was finally at peace. Life slowly returned to normal after that. The house felt lighter, brighter. Mom and Dad were happy and the whispers were gone for good. But sometimes late at night, I'll feel a gentle warmth at the foot of my bed, as though Lucky was there, watching over me. That evening, after songs of emotion and spirit had finally said, I visited Grandma's grave. It was no longer an empty plot. It has been tended to with care. The flowers vibrant and the gravestone inscribed with words of love and remembrance. For years, her grave had been neglected, forgotten by everyone but me. But now it was a place of healing. As I knelt by the grave, I placed a single flower on the stone, a wild flower, the same kind Grandma used to love. I stayed here for a long while, feeling the weight of the past, but also a strange peace, as if the earth itself was telling me it was time to let go. And just as I stood to leave, I noticed something remarkable. A young dog, black at night, playing near the edge of the garden. He seemed to be waiting for me. He didn't bark or chase. He simply sat there watching. For a brief moment, I felt the pull of familiarity, the same sense of warmth I have felt so many times before. But this time, there was no fear, no anger, just a peaceful presence, a quiet assurance that everything was as it should be. The dog wagged his tail, his growing eyes soft and kind. I smiled and turned away, walking back to my car. As I glanced over my shadow, the dog was gone, but the scent of wild flowers lingered in the air. Years passed and I grew older. My children, now grown, often came to me for advice, for stories of their ancestors. I would tell them about grandma, about the woman who had loved fearless even in death. The photograph still hung in the living room, a tribute to a complicated, imperfect woman who had, in the end, found her way home. And though I never saw Lucky again, often felt her presence around me, like a guiding hand, a gentle reminder that love, though sometimes difficult, it's always worth the fight. And when I close my eyes at night, I would whisper, "Thank you, Grandma, for everything. I'll always remember you." The final words of the diary Grandma had written long years, "I want to be remembered," had come true, not in the way she had expected, but in a way that had healed the pain of the past. Her spirit, her memory, and her love had finally found the peace she had sought. And in that peace, we were all free. I've come to the end of this amazing story. I hope you did enjoy it. See you in my next video upload. Please don't forget to subscribe in my channel, Biageli Stories.